Torture Culture in Malaysia, a case study of the death of Teoh Beng Hock. Presented by Group 9.
In this video, we will be discussing on important issue related to human rights and justice, which is torture culture, with focus on the Teoh Beng Hock case in Malaysia. First, torture culture refers to the use of abuse, intimidation or pressure during the investigation or detention. This action can harm individuals physically and emotionally, and they go against basic human rights. Human rights are the fundamental right that every person should have, including the right to safety, dignity, and fair treatment. Protecting this right is important in building a just and fair society. However, in Malaysia, there have been concern about abuse of power and death in custody. One of the most well-known cases is the Teoh Beng Hock case. Teoh Beng Hock was a political aide who was found dead in 2009 after being questioned overnight by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission or MACC. His death raised serious public concern about accountability, transparency, and how investigations are conducted. This case became important because it highlighted the need for justice and stronger protection of human rights.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Nur Alia, and today I will be explaining about the causes of torture culture in Malaysia, especially in relation to the case of Teoh Beng Hock. First and foremost, one of the main causes is abuse of authority. Abuse of authority is when people with power misuse their authority or influence during investigation or even during detention. Instead of protecting the human rights of the detainees, they use intimidation, threats, and any other sort of way to get what they want from the detainees. Furthermore, weak monitoring systems can also contribute to the rise of torture culture in Malaysia. In some cases, there is not enough supervision over our enforcement agencies. Thus, misconduct can often happen much more easily as there is no strict action being taken. Besides that, external pressure during investigation can also contribute to the rise of torture culture. Authorities are often expected to solve cases quickly, especially cases regarding high-profile individuals. Thus, some officers might opt to a much more harsher interrogation methods to get information faster. In addition, many victims are afraid to speak up or even report the abuse they have been facing because they fear retaliation or they feel like there will be no action taken regarding the abuse they have been facing. Eventually, this will lead to weak accountability. If officers who abuse their power believe that they will not be reported, then this will lead to a culture where misconduct can be seen very often and can be seen as a normal thing in the society. Related to the case of Teoh Beng Hock, this incident raised serious public concerns about interrogation practices and the treatment of detainees in Malaysia. It also made people question the accountability, the credibility, and also the transparency of our enforcement agencies. In conclusion, torture culture in Malaysia can be caused by abuse of power, weak monitoring, external pressure during investigation, fear among victims, and also weak accountability. Therefore, stronger protection of human rights and better reforms are needed to ensure similar cases will not happen again, and we can prevent others from experiencing the same thing.
Thank you, Alia, for explaining the causes. So now I'm Mira, and I will discuss the deep impacts of a torture culture. When abuse, intimidations, and pressure become normal practices during the investigations, the consequences affect our entire society. It is actually not just about the physical harm, but it is about the long-term damage to our community and also institutions. First, it fundamentally violates basic human rights. Every single individual has an inherent right to safety, dignity, and also a fair legal process. When enforcement agencies use physical or psychological force, that human dignity is actually completely stripped away. Second, it causes severe emotional and psychological trauma. The scars of torture are not just physical. For the victims who survive and for those families who lose their loved ones, it leaves a lifetime of anxiety, depression, and deep emotional pain. Third, it destroys public trust in our authorities. This is actually a major institutional crisis. When the very agencies sworn to protect the citizens become sources of fear, people lose faith in the legal system. Instead of feeling safe, society begins to live in a state of constant fear. Finally, it damaged Malaysia's international reputation. In a globalized world nowadays, a country's human rights record is highly monitored. High-profile cases of custody abuse tarnish our image, making Malaysia look like a nation that disregards the rule of law. So here we can see all these painful impacts in our real-world case study, which is the tragic death of Teoh Beng Hock. When a young political aide went into an enforcement building for questioning and never came out alive. And actually, it did not just devastate his family, but also it shocked the entire nation. So this tragic incident instantly turned public fear into national outrage. It forced the Malaysian public to question what really happens behind the closed doors during the interrogations. It became a powerful symbol that sparked nationwide discussions about the urgent for absolute justice, transparency, and also accountability. So in conclusions, we cannot build a fair, safe, and developed nations if our citizens are constantly afraid of the authorities. The impacts are too costly for us to ignore. So to explain how Malaysia is actually addressing these issues through government initiative and also institutional reforms, I will now pass the presentation over to Iman. Let's go.
For my part, I will explain the government initiative and reforms taken by Malaysia to stop torture culture, especially after the death of Teoh Beng Hock. First, one important effort is the role of Suhakam, which is Malaysia's Human Rights Commissions. Suhakam helps investigate complaints related to human rights abuse and detention issues. The organizations also encourage the government to improve the treatment of detainees and ensure that investigations are conducted fairly and responsibly. Second, the government and several organizations have introduced human rights awareness programs. These programs are important because they educate enforcement officers and the public about human rights, ethical conduct, and the danger of abuse of power. Through training and awareness campaign, authorities are encouraged to respect human dignity and follow proper legal procedures during the investigations. Next, Malaysia has also discussed police integrity and reform efforts to improve accountability among enforcement officers. One major proposal is the IPCMC, or Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commissions. The purpose of this commission is to provide independent monitoring of police misconduct and allow investigations into abuse of power or wrongful actions by officers. Although the proposal faced challenges and debates, it increased public discussion about accountability and transparency in law enforcement. In addition, there have been stronger calls for monitoring detention centers and interrogations procedures. This includes improving the CCTV monitoring, ensuring safer detention conditions, and reducing the risk of violence or mistreatments during the investigations. The death of Teoh Beng Hock became an important turning point because it increased public demand for transparency and institutional reforms. Many Malaysians began questioning whether enforcement agencies had enough accountability and whether stronger protection for detainees were needed. In conclusions, Malaysia has taken several steps to address torture culture through human rights advocacy, institutional reforms, public awareness, and accountability efforts. However, continuous improvement and stronger enforcement are still necessary to ensure justice, transparency, and protection of human rights for everyone.
And now, I will present a real-world case study related to torture culture and custodial protection in Malaysia, which is the case of Teoh Beng Hock. In 2009, Malaysia was shocked by the death of Teoh Beng Hock, a political aide who was involved in investigation conducted by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, also known as MACC. On July 15, 2009, Teoh Beng Hock was brought to the MACC office in Shah Alam for the questioning regarding aligned misuse of public funds. According to reports, he was questioned for many hours overnight. The next morning, he was found dead after falling from the building where the MACC office was located. The incident immediately attracted nationwide attention and became one of the most discussed human rights cases in Malaysia, and many members of public questioned the interrogation procedure used during the investigation. Human rights organizations, lawyers, and civil society groups also raised concerns regarding detainee safety, psychological pressure, and accountability within enforcement institutions. Although the case was not officially classified as a torture, it raised serious concern about custodial treatment and possible abuse of power during investigations. Following the incidents, NGOs and members of public demanded justice, transparency, and an independent investigation into the case. Public discussions about custodial death and human rights protection became more active after the incidents. The case also increased pressure on the government to improve monitoring system, strengthen accountability, and ensure better protection for individuals under custody. This case is closely related to the issue of torture culture because it highlighted concerns about intimidation, long interrogation hours, and also weak custodial protections. It also shows how abuse of power or lack of accountability can reduce public trust in authorities. As a result, the case encouraged discussions on institutional reform and the importance of respecting human rights during investigations. In conclusion, the Teoh Beng Hock case remains an important example in discussion about human rights, custodial protection, and also government accountability in Malaysia. The incident reminds society that transparency, professionalism, and protection of human dignity are essential in every investigation process. Thank you.
In the end, the Teoh Beng Hock case shows why human rights and justice are very important in every society. When abuse, pressure, or intimidation happen during investigation, it can harm people and reduce public trust in the authorities. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly, safely, and with respect. This case also reminds us that authorities must always act honestly, responsibly, and transparently when carrying out investigation. To build a fair and safe society, torture culture must be stopped and human rights must always be protected. The Teoh Beng Hock case remains an important reminder that justice and transparency are necessary for the people to trust the system.